What's up guys, and welcome back to the channel, where in this video we will complete the previously established alternative timeline where we seek to answer the pivotal question, what if Darth Vader raised Luke and Leia? As always, for anyone who has not seen part 1, you can find that video as the first link in the description, so I would definitely recommend that you go check that one out first and then come back to this one. As for the rest of you, the time has come. Part 2 is here, so without any further ado, let's get started. Battle raged through the streets of Coruscant. The Empire had expanded their stranglehold on the galaxy. The Imperial army continued to find strength in numbers just as it always had, although the growing strength of the Rebel Alliance was undeniable. Both parties had grown since the death of Emperor Palpatine, but the devastating power of Lord Vader and his disciples meant continued dominance for the Empire. At each and every battle, the rebels fought with everything they had, but far more often than not, they were overwhelmed, overpowered, and either killed or forced to surrender. Or if they were really lucky, allowed to flee and lick their wounds. Today appeared no different. TIE fighters swarmed the skies, stormtroopers flooded the city, and hidden among their ranks, a warrior. A Sith Lord with a reputation for quick and decisive victory wherever he went. His real name unknown to the rebels, but many had come to refer to him as the Ghost. Where he walked, death followed. The rebels had learned very quickly, if and when you saw the Ghost, you ran. Although few who ever got close enough to see him lived to tell the tale. Where he went, his counterpart was usually not far behind. Rumor had it the Ghost's partner was a she. Her nickname, the Shadow, seen even less frequently than her partner, but no less effective in combat. Together, they were virtually unstoppable, but today, they were playing a slightly different game. Things were different. The rebels had brought the fight to the Empire, and they too had warriors. Formidable, battle-tested leaders, fueled with real determination and purpose beyond a mere lust for greater power. From his towering palace window, Darth Vader watched the battle taking place below, observing the tactics on both sides, admiring the tenacity of the Rebel Alliance. He had come to hold a healthy level of respect for his adversaries. They had passion and resilience beyond that of his own soldiers, but the Empire had numbers. Along with that, they had greater weapons, superior training. There was an unwavering loyalty among his men, and above everything, they had him. Next to the Dark Lord, his teenage daughter stood ready to join the battle upon his command. He was proud of her now, proud of what he had created. She was strong, like him, fierce, like him, but patient as well, just like him. To most, it was not obvious. Luke himself didn't even seem to know it, but Vader did. Leia was more powerful than her brother, and it was her father's fault, really. His favoritism for Luke as they'd grown made Leia stronger. She was more independent, more observant, more mature. She was wise beyond her years. Too wise, maybe. The rebels were pushing forward now, and suddenly, there, two lightsabers, a green and a blue. This was not shaking out the way he intended. Time to bring in the cavalry. Vader would order Leia to rally the 501st and go aid her brother. She started for the door, but as it opened, a familiar face came through the other side. It was a woman Leia remembered. A Togruta, if she wasn't mistaken. Vader continued to stand with his back turned, glaring down at the battle below, not really watching anymore, however. The apprentice was still alive, and apparently as foolish as ever. Leia took a step back. She didn't really know why, but something about the intruder told her attack was not necessary here. Not yet anyhow. She observed carefully as Ahsoka and Vader exchanged words. She remembered the woman from the assault on her father's Star Destroyer many years ago, but the details were fuzzy. She didn't know anything else, just the face. But as the conversation continued, it became apparent that the two of them had history. While Ahsoka's words were directed at Vader, she was simultaneously introducing Leia to many truths she had never been told before. She spoke of their prior relationship to one another, of Obi-Wan Kenobi, of the Jedi, the Sith, Darth Sidious, and then his wife, Leia's mother. She'd always longed to know more about her mother, but her father never spoke of her. He'd been so focused on their training, but the mention of her name did something to him. It was only a small shift in his posture. Most wouldn't have noticed, but not much got past Leia. This was not small talk. It wasn't the typical calm before the inevitable duel. These two knew each other, really knew each other. Vader grew impatient. He commanded Leia to deal with the intruder, but too much had already been said. Leia was loyal to her father. She had done as he asked without question, time and time again. She'd fought for him, argued for him, killed for him. She cared for him, but she was no fool. She had no problem adding a little more blood to her hands, but she was not brainless. She did not simply kill for the sake of killing. This woman had knowledge to offer, if not for him, then for Leia herself. She had done no wrong, and she had a purpose here that was yet to be revealed. She stood defiantly before her father, urging him to come to his senses. Vader took a moment, considering how to proceed, but Ahsoka interrupted once more. Anakin, she's never coming back. Seconds passed, and then a hologram appeared on the round table at the center of the room. It was Luke, requesting his father's help. An explosion shook the palace, causing them all to stagger, fighting to maintain their balance. Father, they've broken through our defenses. The palace shook again, a bit harder this time, and the projection was gone. Vader raised his head and glared at his daughter. He didn't need to say anything else. Leia left the room. She had to help her brother. We don't have long, Ahsoka said. The building shook again. It wasn't going to be standing much longer, and the ground was miles below. Vader had to make a decision now. On the streets, fires blazed, buildings crumbled, the city was falling apart. Up ahead, her brother, in a duel with 2 Jedi. Leia ran for him, pushing rebel troopers aside as if they were no more competent than old separatist battle droids. Ezra Bridger caught a glimpse of her. It distracted him for the slightest fraction of a second. Plenty of time for the ghost. Lightning spewed from Luke's fingers as he sent Ezra flying backward. Now, it was just Luke and Kanan. Bad news for Kanan. Ezra's vision was blurry, but he turned back to watch the Dark Warrior who had stolen his attention. It was so easy for her. She saw every attack long before it happened. An entire platoon of troopers firing upon her, attempting to block her path, but they meant nothing to her. It was completely effortless. And then she made it. Kanan was in trouble. Ezra gathered himself and ran to his master's aid, but this fight was over before it began. The two of them had fought Darth Vader before, many years ago. That was what Ezra told people anyway. In reality, the Sith Lord had ragdolled the two of them about as easily as Leia had just rendered half an army useless. These two were smaller than Vader, but that was where their shortcomings ended. He wouldn't have believed it unless he had seen it, but they may have been even more powerful than their master. They were quicker, lighter on their feet, not to mention they apparently had the power of literal thunderstorms brewing at their fingertips. The Jedi gave more and more ground, simply defending themselves in the hopes that some opportunity would present itself, that something impossible would happen. Behind them, the Empire had regained the advantage. The damage Leia had left in her wake alone was enough to shift the tide, and the arrival of Vader's special forces now spelled doom for the rebels. More TIE fighters began to swarm the sky, more stormtroopers flooded the streets. It would all be over soon. But then, a pulverizing blast from the opposite end of the road, leading directly to the base of Vader's palace. It blew between the Jedi and their Sith opponents, forcing them to leap out of the way. They all turned to watch as the bolt struck the already teetering building. It was more than enough to bring the structure crashing down. Luke shouted for his father as he stood and ran toward the collapsing tower, completely disregarding the Jedi behind him. As the palace crumbled, a figure bursted through a window, white lightsaber blades spinning through the clouds of dust and smoke as she fell toward the ground. Ahsoka stuck the landing, pausing only for a moment before running directly back into the wreckage. Luke followed her, Leia not far behind. You, Luke scowled as he caught up with Ahsoka. He was only a boy the last and only time they'd met, but he remembered her. He'd thought about her often since that day. The way she'd pushed him away over and over again like he was nothing as he tried to aid his father in battle. She didn't know it, but for all these years, Ahsoka had served as an additional source of motivation for Luke in his training. He worked every day to ensure that the next time they met, she would have no choice but to respect him. And now, on this day, she would bow to his power. He leapt at her in a fury of anger, enraged over the death of his father. He knew no one could have survived this collapse. The remnants that still stood of the palace were not going to remain that way for much longer. A reality Ahsoka was well aware of, but one Luke didn't seem to care about. He attacked, throwing rubble at her with the Force, swinging his lightsaber furiously, not caring if he cut through pillars and walls in the process. He was going to kill her if it was the last thing he did. Leia rounded a corner to catch a glimpse of Luke, quickly approaching the now disarmed Ahsoka. But as she did, the ceiling above her collapsed. Luke stopped dead in his tracks. The entire building behind them had fallen. His fault, he would now acknowledge. He disregarded his opponent, now running back to Leia. Using the Force, he dug through the rubble, quickly uncovering the breathless corpse of his sister. He pulled her out, tears in his eyes as he cradled her in his arms. A Sith Lord, unshaken by any challenge the galaxy threw in his direction, now found himself helpless. He didn't know what to do, and his father was not here to provide an answer. For the first time in a long time, the only time that Luke could ever remember, he began to cry. A loud crash came from the other side of the room as Ahsoka blew a hole through the wall with the Force. Light from the outside poured in as she looked to Luke. "Come with me," she said. "I can help you." Luke stepped through the hole in the wall, cautiously laying his sister down as a medical team quickly went to work. Ahsoka evaluated the body, scanning for any signs of life. But suddenly, a red lightsaber beamed at her throat. Luke raised it, forcing her to stand and return her focus to him. He was trembling, his eyes glassy, voice shaking as he demanded to know why she was helping him. Ahsoka's jaw clenched as she thought for a moment. "You never had a choice," she said. "There's good in you, just like your father." He quivered at the thought, because deep down, he knew it was true. He began to shake harder, his lightsaber blade now so close Ahsoka's throat felt like it was being lit to flames. And then, his name. He heard his name. He looked down to see his sister, somehow reawakened, back from the dead. He knelt down, taking her hand. He didn't know what to say. He paid no attention as Ahsoka moved past him. He and Leia took a second, trying to make sense of what had just happened here, but they were interrupted by a familiar sound. Luke stood and turned to see his father limping toward them. His armored suit coated in dust and rubble, his shredded cape blowing in the wind. Luke wasn't sure what the right choice was right now, but he knew that killing these rebels was certainly not it. He stepped forward and stood next to Ahsoka. Leia struggled to her feet and came to her side. Vader paused as he came to recognize what was going on. Killing Ahsoka was one thing, but murdering his own blood was an entirely different matter, a reality he had come to terms with long ago. He realized what had happened here. Ahsoka had saved his daughter. He peered off into the distance, remembering his wife, once again acknowledging how much his daughter resembled her. He couldn't do this. It was time to stop running from his past. It was time to send his children home. And so it would be here, back on Coruscant where it all began, that the mighty Darth Vader would fall, Anakin Skywalker rising in his place. Just as it was in the original timeline, Anakin's children would be the key to his reawakening. He would lay his lightsaber down, embrace his children, assure them that Ahsoka had them on the right path, and finally, he would thank his old apprentice for saving his children and himself. From here, Luke and Leia would be given a second chance. They would help the rebellion to destroy the Empire, with many Imperials surrendering under the persuasion of their masters. The children would learn the truth about their father's fall, about the great man he had once been, and about their mother, who would have given anything to see how far her children had now come. Anakin, however, would have many sins to answer for. But first, one last mission. There was a place deep in the unknown regions, a place that had to be destroyed. He would go there alone, determined to protect his family and the galaxy from the treachery that was sure to rise from this planet, or at the very least, to die trying. And that day on Coruscant would in fact prove to be the last day anybody would see Darth Vader ever again. The wide assumption across the galaxy would be that Darth Vader had died at the Battle of Coruscant, and that would be the end of it. His body would never be recovered, leaving questions for some, but in the end, that was all they were, questions with no answers to be found. No one knew for sure what happened to the Sith Lord, and no one had enough information nor enough bravery to try and find out. And that, my friends, is where this story ends. Now, before I wrap this video up, I do just want to acknowledge that this story could obviously have gone in a very different direction, and it was one that I heavily considered taking. but I feel like I've ended my last few scenarios in a bit of a dark place, and because the story of Star Wars, particularly that of Anakin Skywalker, is supposed to be about redemption and finding yourself, I really wanted to try and bring Anakin back, and honestly, I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out. It just took me a while to figure out how I wanted to tell this story and how I wanted it to end. But with that, I am going to go ahead and wrap this video up here, so I want to thank every one of you so much for watching. I appreciate your support more than you can possibly imagine, and I can't emphasize that enough. So again, thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, do remember to drop a like to support the channel before you go. Subscribe to the channel for future Star Wars content, and remember, the Force will be with you always.